Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for attending during your lunchtime hour. I knew this was going to be somewhat popular because we're all very interested in what we can do to help right now in these uncertain times. So we very recently asked Ian and Mike Wiltberger and Lindsay Goodwin to help out with this advocacy town hall, and they really rose to the occasion, so thank you all very much. Ian's going to present a little bit, and then we're going to have a moderated Q&A in the room, and hopefully we'll come out of this feeling somewhat energized and somewhat hopeful about what we can do going forward. Please.
All right. Hi, everybody. A couple things. So one, we are recording this, and it's on Zoom. We're going to be distributing it afterwards, so if you want to reference anything or you want to share it with colleagues, we're going to make sure that's available. Second, anybody who's seen me this week knows that I came down with something on the flight here. So if I don't have my usual vim and vigor, it's not about the topic or the state of everything. It's just I might get my butt kicked. Okay, so what we're going to do here. So I'm going to go a little bit over kind of the budget process, how the congressional and federal budget process works. It's going to be a little bit of schoolhouse rocks like Civics 101, so I apologize to those of you that steeped into that, but it is kind of helpful for some of the other folks who definitely are not from America or haven't been paying attention to this for a while. Then we'll talk a little bit about kind of the specifics of the FY26 President's budget request and what that means for our field. And then we'll talk a little bit about what an event that happened last week where we had some folks from the community on the Hill advocating. And then we'll have that open discussion that Allison talked about. Okay, so first, the budget process. So this is a simplified overview of what the federal budget process looks like for science. So you can see there's a lot going on, and it was built, surprisingly, intentionally that way. But basically what the budget process is a kind of back and forth between the executive branch of the government, so AKA the White House and the administration, the President's administration, and Congress. And in particular, there's two different parts of Congress that work in the budget process. There's what's called the appropriations committees. So those are people who set priorities as far as kind of what the agencies within the administration should be working on. So you might hear about like the NASA or the NOAA authorization bills that kind of tell the agencies what they should prioritize. But authorization committees do not give any funding. The funding is given by what's called the appropriations committee, right? And so it's very common, things like the Pro-SWIFT Act that we heard about earlier this morning from Stephen and Robin in regards to the decadal survey. The Pro-SWIFT Act was an authorization bill, right? It said that you should do stuff, but there was not necessarily any funding behind it. Other times there's funding allocated for specific things that may or may not actually be within what the authorization committee's language says. Okay, so that's the appropriations process, right? That is the mechanism by which money is given to the government to spend, all the different agencies. Now, there's a lot of different things that are happening right now, and I know that it's kind of confusing to track what's what. And so the rescissions, which you may have heard a lot about and are kind of ongoing right now in Congress, is different than the appropriations process. Rescissions is basically potentially canceling or clawing back money that's already been appropriated, right? So right now, the rescission package that's going through Congress is targeting FY25 dollars, right? Money for this fiscal year that was appropriated last year. And so right now, Congress is looking at a bill that would cancel about $9.5 billion of funding. That doesn't necessarily affect our community. They're kind of very targeted to things like USAID, funding for PBS and NPR, climate programs, things like that. It's not necessarily something that would really target our community. The timeline for this, you've probably been seeing it in the news, that was passed by the House in June, and it needs to pass in the Senate if it's going to by July 18th. There's actually a ticking clock. Once the White House gives the rescission package to Congress, they have 45 days. They have to approve it or else it kind of expires. One of the reasons that this is being used by the administration is that it does not require the 60-vote supermajority in the Senate. So you can pass it with a fairly narrow majority like the Republicans now have. Okay, so that's rescissions. That's taking back money that's already been appropriated. Okay. You may have also been hearing about reconciliation. This is the one big, beautiful bill that people might have been tracking or hearing about. So reconciliation is a special process that can be used to expedite legislative things that have to do with the budget. In particular, again, expedited, it does not require the 60-vote threshold. And so it can't be filibustered. You can get it with a really simple majority of just 51 votes. Now, usually this is used to address what we call mandatory spending. So things like Medicare, Medicaid, civil military benefits, food stamps, or SNAP, which was formerly known as food stamps, and farm programs. But over the last couple decades, they've been using it more and more to really try to implement more partisan spending priorities than just kind of the mandatory spending. Now, important caveat here, it has not been used to enact or rescind discretionary funding yet, right? Historically, it has not been used to do that, but there's actually nothing in the statute that would prevent an administration from trying to do that, assuming that Congress approved it. And so this is the one big beautiful bill that we've heard about. It primarily focuses on tax cuts, border security, energy policy, deficit reduction, some things to Medicare and other healthcare programs. You can notice that there's some highly partisan things that are included in that list. And so, the Republican Party is really trying to use this to enact some very partisan topics in a way that doesn't require a supermajority. One oddity here is that you might have seen Senator Cruz, who's the chair of the Authorization Committee in the Senate, did suggest some potential new amendments that would actually add money for NASA in the reconciliation bill. It's kind of odd because that's not what reconciliation would do, but it's Cruz's way to kind of show support for NASA. To be clear, that would not necessarily go to Science Mission Directorate. It's largely in the exploration areas. And so the status of this is that the one big beautiful bill passed in the House in May, and now it's waiting in the Senate. They're trying to get it to pass before the Senate recess for the July 4th holiday. It seems like it may be less and less likely that that happens. Okay, so that's rescission, reconciliation, appropriations, 3 different things. Okay, so the way that this would normally work is there's actually this budget cycle where NASA works with, or any agency, works with the administration, right? OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, both in the White House. They work together to kind of come up what the budget will be for the next year. That then comes out as the president's budget request. There's usually a process called passbacks where the administration gives information back to the agencies to kind of give them a little bit of idea of what the policy priorities are. So those of you that saw reports that came out in March that kind of heralded what might have been coming in the president's budget, that was the passbacks between OSTP, OMB, and the agencies. After the PBR comes out, the appropriations process starts. We'll talk about that more in a second. Usually goes through the House, then the Senate, and then it would get enacted and passed. The reason that this colorful chart is up here is just to highlight the fact that the way the budget process works is there's kind of always 3 budgets in play at a given time. There's the current fiscal year. So if you look at this line here, this is where we sit right now roughly. We're wrapping up FY25, right? Where you're spending on the FY25 budget. The FY26 budget is in the appropriations process, or about to start the appropriations process, right? The PBR has already come out. Congress is about to do its work. And then actually the agencies and OMB are about to get ready in the next month or so to get the FY27 budget started. So in any given time, there's multiple budgets that are tracking. Now, ideally, Congress would be done with the appropriation process before the start of the new fiscal year, October 1st. That hasn't happened in over 25 years, going on 30 years now. So that's what's supposed to happen, right? You're supposed to have a new budget before you start acting on that budget, but that hasn't happened for a while. Most of the time we get what are called continuing resolutions. You probably heard about that. We're currently on a continuing resolution. That's basically just, hey, do what we did last year. Now, important caveat, we have a continuing resolution for FY25. There's a lot of speculation that we might have a continuing resolution in FY26. We have never had a continuing resolution on top of a continuing resolution, right? 2 in a row. That's never happened. So there's a little bit of open ambiguity there of what that would mean if that were the route that Congress decided to go. Okay, so the appropriation process, the way that this works is in this flow chart here is the White House proposes the budget. We've seen that. That's the PBR. It goes to the House and the Senate committees. It then goes to the floors. They basically say, yes, we are going to start the budget process. that goes to the budget committees, right? So the appropriations committees. That then gets assigned, each of the appropriations has 12 bills, right? It's 12 separate parts of the budget that they approve. NASA, NSF, NOAA, the things that we care about most, are all contained within one of the sub-bills called Commerce, Justice, and Science, so CJS. You might hear a lot about the CJS bill, right? That is the specific subcommittee that handles the science that we care about. So the way that that usually works is both subcommittees in the House and the Senate will pick up the bill, mark it up, right? That's when they kind of edit it. It will get approved, in theory, within those committees. It then goes to the full Appropriations Committee, and then it would get voted on the House floor. At that point, they then come together in what we call conference, right? So the Senate might say, we want to get, I'm just going to throw numbers out, we want to give $850 billion to NASA heliophysics, and the House might say, we want to only give $800 million, we all wish. They have to come together in conference to hash out what the final numbers will be. In conference, they do that. It gets voted on to ensure that both houses are happy with it, and then it would go to the president for signature to be enacted. Okay, so that was kind of the crash course in Civics 101 of what's happening in the administration right now. Okay, so now we'll dive into the PBR specifics. And all of this information is in the PBR. We've just highlighted out specific things. I'm going to go through them a little bit quickly, but if you have specific questions or things like that, we can talk about that. So the top line for NASA would be reduced. The SMD budget would be cut by about 50%, with specific a little bit more than 40% in heliophysics. We also, the entire STEM engagement program, which is where all space grant funding lives in all 50 states, that would be entirely canceled and zeroed out. If we look specifically in the Science Mission Directorate, we're looking again about a 50% cut, where we would have a leaner, more focused science program with over 40 lower priority missions being discontinued. That's across the entirety of SMD. So this is the heliophysics mission fleet. Some of you might have seen things like this floating around on the internet, but this is what would happen if the PBR were enacted. Almost the entirety of the fleet in Geospace in particular would be discontinued, with things like EASY having recently launched and tracers coming up in the next few months. That's kind of it as far as Geospace. Okay, so this is just representing that. We're looking at about a 46% cut in heliophysics from 805 million down to 432. If we kind of go line by line, the research program, which is where the RNA sits, we're looking at about 30% cut. The sounding rockets program also gets a pretty significant cut, over 60%. Obviously, this doesn't look great. If you dig in a little bit more, in addition to that significant cut to the RNA program, there's also a zeroing out of the guest investigator program, which is over $20 million of RNA projects. Obviously, that would be a huge hit to the community. And then if you go in down here, there's also this OMDA line, other missions and data analysis. That's being cut by about $40 million, which is where a lot of the currently operating kind of historical missions sit. In the LWS program, we're looking at about 35% cut, including the zeroing out of GDC, which kind of the PBR states carries on the administration's position on GDC. In the STP program, we're looking at over about $100 million worth of cuts. That is both IMAP moving into phase E, right? So there's a giant drop off in funding there because IMAP has moved out of the build phase and into the flight program, the prime mission. But you'll also see that all of the operating missions, in particular MMS, Hinode, and Timed, are all proposed to be discontinued. In the Explorers program, the UVST and Helioswarm missions are canceled during their formulation. And then, again, a lot of the older operating missions, Themis, Gold, Iris, ACE, are all closed out, and the mid-X opportunity is cut. So there's about a 40% cut overall to the Explorers line. Now, this is one of the areas where you might say, yay, space weather got an increase. This is not a real increase. The budget line increases by about 35%, but it's largely because Stereo and SOHO were moved from the STP and LWS lines into space weather, right? So it's just a shuffling of money around. It's not an actual infusion of new funds. The technology program is cut by over 50%, and then embedded in there is the fact that they would propose to eliminate the HESTO program, which has been managing and overseeing all of the technology developments, including HTIDES and HFOS, and the HFOS opportunity that looks at flight studies would also be canceled. And then, like I talked about earlier, the STEM Engagement Office, which is the home to Space Grant, which is in every one of the 50 states, would be canceled. And the language here is a little difficult. That we don't need outreach. Just doing great science missions is enough to inspire the next generation. Okay. Other piece that's not unique necessarily to the heliophysics division, but obviously would be a huge hit to our community is the potential workforce reductions at the NASA centers. So if you look here, Goddard and Marshall in particular, which are kind of the two centers where we have heliophysics engagement, or the largest heliophysics engagement, we're looking at roughly cut in half in the number of Goddard civil servants, and about 500 from Marshall. If you dig down into that, it really does end up targeting the science staff at those places. So over 40% cut to the science staff at Goddard, and an over 50% cut to the science staff at Marshall. Obviously, these are our colleagues that are critical, not just to the research that we do, but also to supporting a lot of the missions and other work that we do. So this would obviously be a huge hit to the community. Okay, NSF, we focus a lot on NASA there, and I will thank Mike Wilberger for these slides, but things are, if possible, even more bleak on the NSF side. So NSF would be cut by about over 50%, with the anticipation that the success rates for proposals writ large would drop from about 25% down to single digits. Note that the cuts are not applied uniformly, so FFRDCs, things like that support the agency, are getting cut by about 40%, but the research grants are really getting disproportionately cut, right? Facilities and FFRDCs were kind of cushioned somewhat. They're getting significant cuts, but not as large as 50%. One note there is with a cut as large as 40%, assets in our field like NSO that operates DKIST wouldn't be able to operate on that. They would need to shut down the system. It's just too low of an operating budget for them to continue. The infrastructure cuts, which I know are of interest a lot to our community, kind of vary depending on the program. In particular, if we look at the Geo division, it's cut about 45%. Now you might say, well, Geo was only cut by 45% relative to 55% in the rest of NSF. That's not so bad. But a lot of it is actually covered by the fact that the Office of Polar Programs is folded into Geo. So again, they're moving money around in the organization that makes it look like the cuts may be not as bad as they are. But Geo is actually cut by over 60% if you take out the Office of Polar Programs part. AGS in particular, part of Geo, is cut by almost 60%. And the research grants part of AGS, which I'm sure is what is, many people in this room are funded by, is actually cut by over 70%, three quarters. We're an over $100 million cut to the AGS grants program, from over $150 million down to 40. If we just look at priorities in NSF, and some of this was alluded to earlier in the week during the agency town hall, but Geo is going to be looking at AI investments. We're really looking at research in natural hazards such as wildfires, earthquakes, and windstorms. Notice that space weather is not included there, even though it's at the national level and some executive orders been included. DKIST, which is the bottom right, at the FY26 budget request level, NSF will continue the commissioning of Inouye in its data center. But maybe NSO doesn't necessarily agree with that, even though it's in the PBR to say that. And then NCAR would curtail some of its research because of the reductions to their funding. So, okay. I know that was bleak. But we're not done there. So we did have an event last week on Tuesday the 17th where the Heliophysics Coalition, so folks may have heard from this from me or others in the community. There's been a lot of emails going around over the last few years, and I've been at meetings like GEM and CEDAR and others. The Heliophysics Coalition is kind of a grassroots effort between AGU and AAS to try to pull together institutional support. So this is more than just individual members of the community. This is the institutions committing to speak with one voice and advocate for heliophysics. And you can see there on the map there, we've got over a dozen institutions across the country, both academic institutions as well as industry partners that are working to try to coordinate our messaging and make sure that we are advocating for heliophysics. So the Heliophysics Coalition put together this event on the 17th. We had 50 participants from across the country, 38 different institutions and 35 districts and 24 states plus DC. I will say there was a challenge issued on one of our coalition calls, our monthly coalition calls, by the lobbyists that we work with that said, get me 50 heliophysicists to the Hill. And I said, there's no way. And kudos to the community. Almost everybody that I reached out to either said, we're sending somebody, or I wish we could, but we're doing everything we can in our district. Let us know what the talking points are. We're reaching out. So huge, huge, huge kudos to the community for really stepping up. And you can see here just a little bit of the demographics of the 50 participants. We had folks from a wide range of background. We had about a quarter of the folks were early career, whether they were early career or actually almost 50% were early career, whether they were early career PhD or students or postdocs. And about a third of them had never done anything with congressional advocacy before. So it was really not just a great opportunity for us to speak about the community, but also a great opportunity for these folks to understand exactly what this looks like and what it can be like. So these are the participants. I will ask if anybody is in this room, was on the visit, please raise your hand. There's quite a few. If everybody else can just give a round of applause for these folks. They took time out of their schedules to travel and take an entire day that was really exhausting to schlep back and forth from the Senate to the House and back and forth. So thank you all for answering the call. We did 85 meetings on the Hill in one day. Those 10 groups were hoofing it back and forth. About a little more than a third of those meetings were with Republicans, either in the Senate or the House, and we actually hit a little bit more than on the House side than we did on the Senate side. Just to give you some scope, I've been doing congressional advocacy stuff with AAS and AGU for about 10 years now, a little over 10 years. This is more than the combined number of meetings and number of people that I've ever brought on the Hill before over the last 10 years. Usually we have maybe 8 people, and we'll do maybe 8 meetings in a day. This is unprecedented. So huge, huge, huge thank yous to all the participants, those in the room and those not, as well as all the institutions. Many of the institutions footed the bills to send their participants, and so huge thank you to them. It wouldn't have happened without them. Also thank you to Actum, which is the lobbying firm that works for both APL and SWIRI. They did a lot of the heavy lifting on the logistics of coordinating all of this. AGU and AAS both contributed professional advocacy and public policy folks to help us. The AAS Solar Physics Division actually contributed over $10,000 in travel support for those who couldn't get funding from their institution. And then SWIRI, Southwest Research Institute, actually also donated for an orientation dinner the night before, where we went over a lot of the same stuff that you're seeing here. So huge, huge, huge thank you to all of them. Also, they're not here, but Gordon Emsley from Western Kentucky University and Graham Kerr from Catholic University both were hugely helpful in the organization of the event. Here's just some proof that we were actually there, just a smattering of some of the different groups. You can see here different members of the community, both in the room as well as folks from the solar side. So it was really great. Thank you all again. Okay, so going from that as a stepping off point, what are the next steps? So from what we've heard, the House is unlikely to provide funding levels that are very different than what the PBR had in the CJS bill. And that's where NASA and NSF sit. But there is still an opportunity for us to fight in the Senate and then ultimately in conference, right, after the Senate bill is approved, and that'll largely spill into the fall. So we're probably not talking again about having something in place by October 1st. So the things that you can do: 1, start documenting impacts to your institution, your district, your state, right? Work with others at your institution as well as your federal relations folks at your institution to try to figure out, what does this mean to you? That is the best way to speak to staffers and members of Congress, right? This is what's happening in our town, in our state, in your district. It's affecting people who vote for you, or you would like to vote for you. Other thing to do is start collecting a master list of all the places where heliophysics funding goes. And we have some of this, but it's definitely not complete. I will admit that in trying to get 50 people to join this event, I started hearing about places that I didn't know. I had no idea that there was researchers in Missouri doing heliophysics, or certain parts of Oregon. And so if you know about places where heliophysics research is going, funding is going, please let us know. We're trying to figure out how to collate all of this and collect it. But understanding where all the districts, all the places where heliophysics happens will be incredibly important to getting support for the field. And the last thing I'll say here, and this is absolutely critical. The folks who were at the Hill visit know that we emphasize this about 45 times. We have to not advocate for specific programs, right? I care about X. Please save Y. We can talk about how cuts to things would affect us, right? I work on MMS. It's fine for me to say, listen, I work on MMS, it's proposed to be cut. It would really damage my career, and those are the people that work with me. What we can't say is, I want you to save MMS. That, if everybody starts doing that, that then leaves it up to Congress to who's going to be the last one to get the language in, and either A, we get a piecemeal language in the bill where certain things are saved and certain things aren't, or everything gets dictated to be saved, and then NASA's hands are tied because they have to spend that money because they've been appropriated, and then they have to decide what gets cut at the expense of those things. So what we need to do is make sure that we are advocating for the top line budget of heliophysics, right? This is how much heliophysics needs, and because you get that much money, we'll be able to do all of these things. Same thing for NSF, where you don't have the line items for the individual divisions. Okay, so if you are going to reach out, what should you say? Here are some of the talking points. Phone calls are the best way to communicate. Emails are okay, but phone calls tend to be the best, most effective. Practical applications of heliophysics, not just generalities, not just, oh, it's important for national security, or oh, it's important for critical infrastructure. These are examples of why and how. In particular, specific examples of space weather, right? The Hydro-Quebec event, the radio blackout in December 2019, any specific event, the agricultural impact of the Gannon storm, specific things with numbers and real-world impacts if possible. Talk about what we need to get to the forecasting in space weather to be able to stop those bad impacts from happening. Talk about the significance of the cuts in the PBR. When we met with many of the staffers, they were not aware of what was buried in the PBR and how it would affect our field. So make sure you point it out to them. And more importantly, how is it important to their constituents, right? So like we talked about, what are we talking about as far as jobs and money that are coming to your institution and your district? One of the most successful talking points we had on the Hill was about the lasting impacts of the cuts for our country, right? If losing PhD students and graduate students and the kind of the brain drain that would happen as a result of losing this funding, they started to pay attention to that. Even more important, in many of the discussions, staffers said, well, don't worry, the PBR is just a place to start. We're probably, those numbers are not realistic. What they need to understand, though, is that if they do not act soon, the administration and the agencies, at the urging of the administration, will probably start having to make actions that will not be reversed, right? Whether it's turning off assets or people having to leave the field because the opportunities are drying up because there's funding uncertainty. So one of the things that we really hammered and staffers started to write down was they need to act soon, right? If we don't get a CR until December, that's 6 months from now. Who knows what might happen by then? And a lot of that probably won't be fixable. And so, and again, as last but not least, the specific asks, the numbers that we're advocating for are $7.5 billion for NASA SMD, with 850 of that going to heliophysics, and then a $9.9 billion NSF top line. Okay. I'll just note, anybody who's walking around through the Skywalk, I came across this mural a few days ago, which I thought was particularly apt. So I'll leave it there, and hopefully there's time for good discussion. Thanks.
Hi, Ian. Thanks again. Really appreciate your support and all your hard work you're doing. So the CR. Okay, I've had a number of discussions with people about the CR. Some people say it's great. Some people say it's disastrous for us. I understand, my limited understanding of the CR is that the CR is the 2024 budget, but it's the ceiling. They can appropriate all the way down to the PBR. So if you could explain that a little bit, because I literally have had people say, oh, CR is great for us. Other people say CR is disastrous for us.
So I'll maybe have Mike chime in too. So I'll also answer with my limited understanding of how the congressional budget process works. So again, like I said earlier, we've never had a CR on top of a CR. So things are a little bit kind of Wild West here. One of the things, if you saw in the news when the CR for FY25 was passed back in March, there was a lot of reporting about the fact that Congress was kind of giving up some of the control of the purse strings. That's because normally when a CR is passed, there's language in there about what can and can't, the money can and can't be used for, whether or not each individual line has to be followed or not. Congress decided to take that language out in the FY25 CR. So if there were a 26 CR and they followed that same process where they don't put in the specific language that directs the administration to spend the funding the way that it was originally appropriated in FY24, then you're right. The administration can spend the money however they want to. Mike, do you want to add?
That's a key point on that language that's not there. And we're starting to see actions in the current administration for FY25 where they're not releasing the funds to the agencies like NSF and NASA to spend it. And then they may try to do a pocket rescission at the end of the fiscal year saying, well, we didn't need this money because we didn't spend it, and it's out of the time to appropriate it. And then if you did a CR on top of it, it would be at a much lower level than the flat FY24 thing there. So the risk is large and real in my mind for impact of a CR on top of a CR without these guideline rails that are typically in a CR.
And then we start getting into the whole realm of impoundment, which people might have heard of, which is basically what happens if the administration doesn't spend money that they were allocated to spend. It's a real mess.
Thanks, Ian, for great presentation and good input for all of us. One advocacy point that I would like to make is your map on the heliophysics missions that would be lost. I'd like to see on top of the red crosses the amount of money that we're wasting by turning those assets off. I'm also a little bit surprised that NASA has been so unimaginative in trying to find solutions to continue these missions. And I'm just wondering, do you have any insights from Nikki or someone as to what's behind this thinking?
I don't have any insight from anybody at headquarters on this, but I mean, my own take is that when you're talking about an almost 50% cut, it's not that easy to find that level of savings in the budget, right? And I think a lot of this is just, okay, what absolutely needs to happen and what can you do for $430 million? I don't think that that headquarters had a whole lot of options, to be honest. If you have a $430 million cap, you have to figure out what fits there, and a lot of it's not going to.
Yeah, I'll just comment on the question about the CR and if it's good for us or bad for us. And then Ian had mentioned the pocket rescission. mechanism. So when we were on the Hill, what a lot of the staffers said is they're angry, and their bosses are angry about not getting funding that was allocated for FY25. So if you have projects, specific projects that are not getting the funding that was originally allocated, your Congress people want to know, and you can either work through your institution liaison or contact them directly, but they want to know, and they will go track it down. If they have a grant number or a contract number to go on, they will go track it down and try to force that money to get to their state and to their people. And that might actually help with the that whole mechanism that Ian was just mentioning.
Just to follow up on that, one of the staffers told us that the House Authorizing Committee minority staff has a request for information out where they're trying to collect that information for the committee itself. So if you have a particular impact, go to the Democratic staff webpage for the House CGS committee and put that information in there. I know there are a bunch of lists that are out there that are going on that don't play, but they want to see those things. If it's your district and you are impacted, tell that story to your representative. When we were on the Hill, what they really wanted to know was, the numbers are good, but what's a story that they can use to go talk to another representative on the other side of the aisle or somebody there about the impact in there. We had a person on our committee that was supported by the space grant, and they got inspired to go do this, and they were from Maine, and if that grant doesn't go to Maine, he wouldn't be where he was today. That story, that personal connection helps them tell the story, tell the advocacy out to the community more than just the numbers. The numbers are what we like scientists do, but the storytelling aspect of it is important.
And I'll just double down on that. The group that I was with had 3 grad students and a postdoc from Alabama and Georgia. And one of the postdocs was able to say, or one of the grad students was able to say, I just defended my PhD. I don't know what I'm doing next. I've had 2 postdoc offers fall through in the last month because of the funding uncertainty. And now I'm getting emails from institutions in Europe and China asking me to go there. That was when the staffers started writing stuff down. So especially early career folks in the room that are looking for jobs and having difficulty finding them, your stories are potentially the most impactful.
Just to pile on that a little bit, my experience, it was kind of interesting. Like, I've talked to Cruise's people like 5 times over the last year, but they were very familiar. They knew everything that was going on. Yet we talked to other, and they had no clue. And you could tell when they were taking notes. And exactly like that, when we talked about the brain drain and what was going to happen, and in 5 years, if all that stuff gets canceled, where are we going to go for our space weather data? And that's going to be China, and the brain drain. That's where as you said, they were taking notes, and they was shocked. I mean, there were some of them that were absolutely shocked at that. So, just to pile on to that, that's somewhere that they really are listening.
Ian, there's some questions from Slido come up next.
Please.
Yeah, we have a couple here. The first would be, what can non-citizen community members do?
The same thing as the rest of us. They don't know that you're not a citizen, you're not voting. Reach out. Absolutely.
And then I'll just go through the second one, and that is, who is the most effective people to call about the detriments to heliophysics? Just Congress?
Yeah, I mean, the action is basically in the hands of Congress now. So representatives and senators are the people you should be reaching out to. I will say, please do not deluge the folks at headquarters at NASA and NSF. This is largely outside of their control. Our advocacy effort should really be focused on Congress at this point.
Yeah, just to double down on that, the government employees, especially at headquarters and the NSF, have specific restrictions about what activities they're allowed to undertake in talking to Congress. So they can't do this. We have to be the voice for it. To add a little bit more specificity to what Ian was saying there, to those of you that are in Republican districts or have friends that are in Republican districts, those are the voices that are going to carry the most weight at the moment, because they're the ones with the power in the House and the Senate at the moment. So, make those stories heard on that side of the aisle.
And I'll just remind something else I want to say. So I know that it seems like there's a lot of things going on that we could get riled up about, and if you're on a call with a representative's office or a senator's office, you might want to go on about all the things that are happening in our world right now. I will advise to stick to heliophysics. All of those other esoteric things, whether it's science in general or what's going on with other political things, other populations are going to be advocating for that, whether they're the larger science societies or the ACLU, whatever it might be. No one else is going to advocate for heliophysics except us. So try to keep your messaging focused, despite all of the other terrible things that may be happening.
So I want to echo on the previous comment about we are losing expertise and really good experts to Europe and China now, because I lost my postdoc who went to Europe, and he's outstanding, but I could not afford supporting him. And then I'm now getting dozens of emails from all other countries about recruiting me, like, do you want to go here? And so that's happening now. So, and also the second comment, like, I'd like to know, how many of you have already called your senators and, the Congress or emailed them. And so I was talking with people, and we all called multiple times, emailed multiple times. But I've also seen people who have who didn't do that. And one of the very minor barrier is they didn't know what to say exactly, and they are in fear that if they said something wrong or something not good, then it's going to have a negative effect. So if there are ways to help people phrase this letter or what they are going to talk, that will be great. I have been helping people with ChatGPT or AI, building a website that people can put in some key bullets, and it will generate a well-written paragraph that we can just read out during those calls, which has been really helpful and helped me get a few colleagues and other friends to call the senators with their own stories. But if we have as a community provide this kind of tool and a prompt to ChatGPT to help them write this, that will be very helpful.
So we have been sending material. I'm sure many of you have seen in the SBA newsletter, and the GEM newsletter, and the CEDAR email distribution. We've been trying to send out as much information with talking points as possible. There's going to be an update, a kind of review on the June 17th event that's going to be going out, so the rest of the community knows about what we did and what talking points in particular were well received. So if there's specific, if you still, based on all that, don't feel comfortable, feel free to reach out to me or Mike or any of the rest of us that are involved with the coalition. We're happy to help.
Yeah, let's talk afterwards.
Sure.
That I'll provide a prompt to spread.
And before we get to the next question, let me just add two thoughts on this. With respect to reaching out and talking to and understand nervousness and wanting to hesitate to it, when you call an office, when you send an email, you're doing it as a constituent. They want to hear from you. They want to know what you're doing. You're not going on to Fox News or MSNBC and being the talking head and engaging in this big vigorous battle. You're just providing the information that you have, your experience, the impacts that you're seeing, your concerns that you have, and they want to hear that. They want to know that regardless of where you are, you're their constituent. They need to know that from you. And you don't have to go all the way to DC to engage directly with the offices there. The representatives are regularly back in the district to hear things. Lots of them will have town halls. You can go to the town hall and engage there. And you also can engage with the staff in the office in your district to do that. And that can be a pathway to build a relationship. You start talking about this concern, and maybe you want to invite them to come to your lab and see your cool CubeSat that you're going to launch, or things like that come into play to build that. So just don't freak out about what you're going to say. They want to hear from you. They want to know what's going on, and start the conversation, start the engagement.
I would say, just to kind of add on, like, as long as you're not talking to them and saying, like, I think heliophysics has too much funding, then I think you're, like, in the good. It's better to call than to do nothing, basically. Yeah, and I have a question over here.
While the mics just get, the other thing I'll emphasize is try not to make it partisan, right? Don't attack the administration. Don't attack any specific politician, right? This is about the community, this is about the research field, this is about your district, this is about the nation. Incendiary language versus one party or another will not help our messaging. Go ahead, sorry, Hector.
So it's not actually a question, sharing an experience on a travel ban that people made a draft ready, beginning with, my name is Akhtar, I am, I don't know, like a postdoc at University of New Hampshire, I'm using this funding, that funding, I'm in heliosphere physics, blah, blah. And then the rest could be exactly the same. What happens is that, I mean, I don't know, it's a good idea for us, but this is what people did for travel ban, and it was like the representative, the senator would get like 10, 15, 200 voice messages. Almost everything was the same, so the concern was the same thing. The names were different, so real people called them to ask for the same thing. So that's also an option. A few drafts that people feel comfortable, of course, everyone can change the draft a little bit to be more comfortable, but if they get that many voice messages the same, they need to act for that.
I'm going to make just one quick interruption before I pass off the mic, and that is it is about 1:05 now. We're going to do 10 minutes max more of questions. I don't know if you have any concluding remarks you want me to save too. So about maybe 3 or 4 more questions, and then we're going to wrap up.
Hi, I'll say something really quick. And speaking of getting rid of barriers, a lot of things that I get asked by people are, who are my representatives? Where can I go find that? There's actually a poster downstairs that I didn't realize was going to be here that's pretty cool about advocacy for this kind of thing, and it has the links to find your representative. I'd recommend it highly. It's a cool looking poster. But yeah, that's it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, my question was, so let's say if this bill gets passed, besides the brain drain and all these other horrible things, is there a plan B of some sort of how we can adapt to this changing landscape, either with industry partners, maybe different international collaborations? What's a plan B that we can focus on?
I feel like that is way outside of my purview as a member of the community and advocacy. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of science we could do with half the money, but there's no way we're going to do all the science with half the money. So,
a comment a little bit on that, and I've actually already commented multiple times during this meeting about this. But I think we need to have a shift in our paradigm about how we address proposals and funding. You know, it's always been, hey, we write great proposals, great science, you know, and we can do these science nuggets, and we write proposals. As long as we write papers and stuff, it's great. You know, that's kind of the way it's been in the past. But that's not gonna, I don't think that's gonna work anymore. We need to have specific, focused goals, and those goals need to be associated with societal goals, or even how does this apply to like getting to Mars or whatever you want to talk about. And so, you know, I mentioned this before, you know, when we talk about focused science topics, you know, what can we say, listen, we can do this, and we can actually achieve a visible goal in 3 years or however long the focused science topic is supposed to go on. I mean, you know, one of my big things is satellite drag that I've talked about a lot with the GDC team and other people. I mean, there's something where we can have a visible impact, and we can actually show that we have a visible impact. I mean, there's lots of things like that. And yes, we still need to do the science, but I think that we need to do a little bit of a shift and think about what NASA and our administration is willing to support. And there's this attitude, this anti-science rhetoric that we're ivory tower people, and let's just you know, give us money and we'll do the science and don't worry about it. But that doesn't work anymore. So that's my own opinion. But
Yeah, as a follow-up, I would just suggest that we look at kind of a bigger picture of a pendulum swinging, right? Right now, Space Force has more than $10 billion more than NASA for funding, and private industry in defense is going way up. The skill set of this community is super valuable all across the board in the space enterprise of the US and across the world. So I would suggest maybe there are possible avenues of more collaborations with industry, with defense, and those sorts of subcontracting or STTRs are potentially viable options.
So if I got a comment in support of both what Ian has said and what Phil has just mentioned, is that it's part of what we've lived in a very tolerant society up until recently, where
Can you talk more into the mic so the people online can hear?
so we've lived in a society that has accepted the value of science and technology as a given, and that's sort of changing. And what I mean by that is that there's been no need to demonstrate the relevance of our science at the small and large scales. It's good for the country, it's good for the world, all those kind of things have been largely accepted. But when we talk about why these cuts are important, there has to be a reason that is now going to be what is the economic impact of the changes that we're seeing in NASA and NSF, and what is the impact on the status of the United States in the world. And so it just suggests that when we talk about the science that we're doing, if you call up your representatives and you tell them, and if you're trying to explain what's going on, as Ian said, I think this is really important. Don't talk about specific things. You can say what you're doing, but often what I find is that people want to talk about the problems that they have personally with their research, why their research is so important. But most people don't get it. You have to have a bigger theme, and the theme would be, hey, without, we're faced with this problem, like as Phil mentioned, satellite drag. So everybody here should be able to relate what they do through some chain of reasoning to the question of satellite drag. And it may be a little bit of a stretch. And the reason why is the three NASA priorities are moon to Mars, planetary defense, and space weather. And the space weather that people most accept as the big impact is going to be on satellite drag. And the reason why is that in 10 years, we'll have 100,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. And how do we manage that constellation? And how do we maintain the commercial viability of $1 trillion space commerce? So.
One thing I want to add on, and I recognize there's an online question, so I'll be quick. It sounds a little orthogonal to what you're saying, but in relation to like societal impacts, one thing I found very impactful when I was at Cory Booker's office was saying like, if we're not able to get research funds at NJIT, we're not going to be an R1 anymore. We're going to be like an R2 teaching institution. And from there, I kind of like pulled the theme of like, look, like if we lose this capability, like just in general, like we can't like engage people in New Jersey in research and science and all these things. So it's like NASA and like our big societal goals, sure. Also, like you're gonna have a population who just doesn't know science as well. And that they seem to really respond well to, or rather, not well, but like they were like, oh, like that really got their interest. Also, there's an online question.
Right, I think, yeah, last question from Slido.
Okay, I'll take just the one that was earliest, and that's, will Fulbright be affected by the funding cuts?
I don't know. Does anybody know that? I'm not sure, unfortunately. Sorry, do you want to do another one since it's very unfulfilling?
If there's time, the next is that, is it the case that only people have the right to vote have a voice to the staffers? And are, I guess, the staffers also looking for stories of green card holders, non-immigrants as well?
Yes. Yeah. So, you don't need to be a U.S. citizen or a voting person to speak to the staffers. They won't know. If you just say, my name is Ian Cohen and I work at and I live in, they don't know. If you are, here on a visa or you have a green card, you can certainly use that as part of your messaging. If you feel like it adds to your story, But again, they don't know. They're not going to look your name or your address up or anything like that to verify who you are.
I just want to jump in as someone who like looks like a citizen but isn't. I think about it as like I pay taxes. So yeah, I should be able to complain about things.
So as we wrap up here, I'll say one more thing. So thank you all for coming. I've heard a lot this week that people want to do a lot. I heard a lot from the community as we were reaching out to try to organize the event about how engaged and active people were. I'll just also suggest that if you're interested in helping get involved in the organization behind all of this and not just kind of doing your part and reaching out to folks, we do need more people in the community that are willing to help lead these endeavors. Brian Walsh, who was here but left, has taken over the SPA Advocacy Committee. From me, he's going to be the new chair. There's some new members there. The coalition is always looking for new people who are going to help potentially drive things. So if you're interested in taking in a bigger role in helping this kind of activity in the community, please let me know. I'd be happy to help support you in that. Thanks, everybody.
And let's take one round of thanking Ian for all his hard work in getting 50 some odd people to talk to 83 districts and keep our voices going. Thanks, Ian.